attached. If you lose your balance, aim for the side so that you fall into the water. To get back on your board from the side, pull yourself aboard while remaining in the prone position. Once aboard, reorient yourself so that you're facing the front of the board. Then, using your paddle to brace yourself, get up to your knees and then stand.
Our son is one.
My father was one.
I am one.
Are you one?
You're watching Rogers TV, St. John's.
What we'd like our authors to do now is take a turn at the podium and just briefly outline the content of the book, and then they'll read for about 8 minutes. Heather, would you like to go first?
Sure.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. So this book is a book for young people, and it is written in free verse. So every page is like its own little vignette. It's a little free verse poem. And then all together, they kind of tell the big story. And the big story is Jet, who is, I think he's 11 or 12, I've forgotten. And is he 12? Okay, thank you, whoever said that.
He's 11 going on 12.
Okay, perfect, thanks. And he has made a big mistake. And I won't tell you what that mistake is, but it's pretty rotten. And he is sent home to Newfoundland to spend the summer with his Grandma Jo and to kind of heal and recover from this big mistake he's made. So I'm just going to start from the beginning, and the excerpts I've chosen doesn't really tell you much about what happens, but it just tells you a lot about the relationship that Jet has with his grandma. So, summer. One summer, after a long plane ride and a rotten bad year, I went to Grandma Jo's. It was my mother's idea. Jet, what you need is a change of scenery. I think she needed a change of scenery too, one without me. Because that rotten bad year, that was my fault. I wondered if a summer spent in a little wooden house on a rocky eastern shore would help us forget that. As the plane flew across the blue-green ocean, I crossed my fingers and hoped. Turbulence. Inside, I was flipping and flopping, churned up like the rough sea below. Please fasten your seatbelts for landing. There it was, the place I was taken from when Dad went to jail. Grandma Jo. I remembered. Her house was painted pink, a sugary pastel shade she said made her heart sing, a shade she loved so much she dyed her hair to match. She called herself the Cotton Candy Granny. I remembered hugs that were big for her size, her arms growing like expandable straws. The tighter they got, the smaller I felt. As I walked off the plane, I wondered if a big kid like me could feel small in her arms again. The old me. I wondered if she'd be expecting the old me. I hoped not. The old me was dead. Small again. She pushed through the crowd shouting, "Yoo-hoo, Jet!" But when she got close, she stopped. "Jet, I can't decide if you're the bee's knees or the cat's pajamas." I buried my face in her jacket, a sweet-smelling rainbow of fleece. I was Jet, the incredible shrinking boy, small in her arms again. She asked if I liked her hair or cotton candy blue. Your house too? She nodded. She was crazy, my grandma, my cotton candy grandma. Pounding. As we pulled up to the little wooden house on the rocky eastern shore, my heart went crazy, pounding like the crashing waves I could hear in the distance. I was so happy to be back, I almost forgot. I was there to forget. Marshmallows straight from the bag. We ate fish and chips drowned in vinegar and washed it all down with some soda. We had greasy fingers, salty lips, full bellies. We ate till all that was left was ketchup streaked on the plate, like finger paint, messy and wild. Then marshmallows straight from the bag, white as clouds, light as air, one after another until poof, they were gone. Every last one. Marmaduke. She gave me the room in the attic, the one with the view of the sea. Of all the rooms in all the world, it was the awesomest room of them all. It made me feel cozy and glowy and warm, like a light had turned on in my heart. Instead of a bedside table, there was a man made out of wood, big nose, big ears, cheeks that drooped down his face. Grandma said, "Meet my new butler. His name's Marmaduke. His tray can hold all of your books." I said, "I only read comics." She said, "What's a comic if it's not a book?" I thought, but it's barely got words. Sorry, I just have to skip forward a bit. Shell. I said to the butler, "Okay if I call you Duke." I imagined him saying, "Please do." I asked, "Are you hollow?" Because I felt hollow, like an egg with the insides blown out, a shell holding air. Counting waves. I pulled the quilt up under my chin and let the whoosh of the sea fill my head. "Duke, let's count waves like we're counting sheep." Together we started at 1. On whoosh number 12, a knock at the door. "Jet, I just wanted to say, I'm glad you are here." And all of a sudden, I was more than just air. Sea glass. I followed her along the water's edge. "What are you doing?" "Hunting." "For fish?" Her laugh was always bigger than I expected. She combed the shore in blue rubber boots, peering here and there between the rocks, then a fist pump. Yes! It was the size of a pebble, frosty, round, and smooth. "Red," she said, "a rare one." Grandma Joe, sea glass hunter. Starfish. All I found was a starfish. Pink, bumpy, a piece missing from one of its arms, or were they legs? I wasn't sure. I felt sad, which was weird. It was only a starfish. Did it even have feelings? For the first time in forever, I thought I might cry. Seemed I cared more about that starfish than I did about all that happened that rotten bad year. The crouching lion. On the shoreline there was a lion, tame enough to be climbed, wild enough to play with the waves. "Careful, Jet, that boulder will be an island at high tide." "Good, then I will stay here until I get stranded. The water will get higher and higher, and no one will be able to reach me to save me, and I will deserve it. I will deserve to be stranded on an island all by myself." The waves lapped softly at the lion's feet. Shh, shh, shh. If I was a wave, I'd come in with a crash, no matter how hard I tried to roll. All this stuff in my head. Grandma climbed on top of the lion. She was always stronger than I expected. "You okay?" "I have all this stuff in my head. Maybe this fresh air will clear it out." I breathed in. Maybe. 5 pieces. In Grandma's hand, 5 pieces of sea glass. 2 white, 2 green, 1 red. "I didn't find anything," I said. "You will." Thank you.
If that's kids lit, I'm very immature reader because right to my heart, it's a universal appeal. I understand you've turned little boys on to reading.
Oh, yeah. How did you hear that? Yes, I've been to a few teacher librarian conferences lately, and I've been approached by the teacher librarians who say that they have had lots of boys in their class express interest in reading this book. And you know, it is kind of a thing where a lot of times boys don't like to read, especially because they think, even though that they're wrong, that books that with a girl on the cover or whatever is for a girl, and that's not the case. Literature is for everybody.
Of all ages.
Of all ages, yeah. So that's really great for me to know that it's making a difference. Yeah.
Thank you. Robert Schaaf, Between Breaths.
You're asking me to read, yes? Yeah.
I am indeed.
Hello, everybody. I'll just start by saying I'm so absolutely thrilled to be here. I can't even tell you to have a play of mine on this list is so amazing, and I'm just thrilled. So thank you to the jury. Thank you. So between breaths, yeah, I went to school with one of John's kids, OJ, back in high school, back in university and high school, and I had heard of John's work back then. He was always on the CBC and stuff, and I didn't much think I'd ever write a play about him. And I guess I came to that because there was something about this story that really moved me. And as I was saying just then, I thought it was going to be about mediation and his kind of work with fishermen, and that is in the play. But one of the first things I did when I made the decision to write the play was to, of course, Google him. And I quickly discovered that he had died the year before. I think it was a year and a half before, in 2010. I started to write this play a long time ago. And the process of discovery of how he had come to pass, he, in around 2002, he was diagnosed with symptoms of a progressing deterioration of his mobility, and he was slipping into dementia. And at the time, they thought it was the resulting consequence of a traffic accident he had had. And so that's the only knowledge he had of this moving through this experience. But he, over the next 8 years, he went from being a guy who was out in Zodiacs, literally with his head in the water, releasing these 40-foot mammals from fishing nets as they panicked, to a guy that couldn't talk in a wheelchair. And that's how he spent the last couple of years of his life. And so looking at that, the play quickly became a play about a person who releases things, but at the end of his life is trapped. So I think I'll just read a small little monologue at the end. What do you need to know about the play? Moves backwards, so we quickly decided that it would be so inconceivably sad to end the play the way John ended. And everyone I spoke to in researching the play did a lot of crying. They were all still very much grieving, but they also did a lot of laughing, and there was a lot of joy and a lot of persisting disbelief in the power the man held while he had all his faculties. And so we wanted to end the play on that note. So the play moves backwards. It starts with him in a wheelchair at the end of his life, and it moves back to his very first whale rescue, which was in 1977, I think. So this monologue takes place, it leads into the final scene, which is his whale rescue. But this monologue takes place at the kitchen table of Wayne, who was a composite character based upon Wade Ledwell, who currently runs the whale rescue program, and Wayne Barney, who was a graduate student who now works with forestry, I think out in Pasadena. But he worked with John way back when. So this is a composite character of both of those people. He's sitting at Wayne's table on a very stormy night. It's the first time they've met. So obviously Wayne has a huge part in his life, and through the play we see that relationship. But this is the first night they met. And John is telling him about the first whale rescue that we're just about to see that happens after this scene. I never set out to rescue that whale last year. This fisherman thought I was there to help, heard I was in the whales, those potheads trapped in the ice the previous year, but I was just there to record them, their distress. I didn't know anything more than that, and I thought I made that clear, but this fisherman, I forget his name now, Jackman, Captain Bob Jackman. He thought I could help. The net wrapped around both flukes, a good 3 turns, all in through the mouth, everywhere a mess. His father had told him to shoot it, boom, down through the blowhole, like he'd done himself before, like they'd all had done. Satisfying somehow, something to do when there's nothing to be done. Rage and frustration and fear. Like you said, real fear, these fellas. Lifetime on the sea, and Captain Bob won't admit to it, but he was ice cold with fear. You understand that. This humpback, he was a big fella. The size of him up close, but he was so tired, been there 3 weeks or something by that point. The sound of him, he was just barely there, you know. Each breath a struggle. It was an awful day of rain and wind. The sea was high, not a sensible day for it at all. We were getting tossed around pretty good. I didn't know what to do, and so I told this frightened fisherman to bring the boat in closer. I told him to bring it in closer, and the look on his face, Wayne, ah, Christ, closer, I said, and I thought he's going to shoot me, never mind the whale. But he did it. I must have looked like I knew what I was talking about, because he went and did it. He brought that boat in closer, good and close, and we were all but up on the whale's back then. The Buddhists say that the last sense to leave the dying is their hearing. And I believe it, because the engine, we spooked him or something, and he just rolled on his side. He rolled on his side, and when he did, his eye came right out of the water. This thing the size of a softball, wet and gray and huge, and I'd never seen anything like that. This eye. And some would call me foolish for saying it, but I'll say it. He heard us, but he saw us too. He was looking at me, right in the eye. Real me is long gone, and there's nothing to be done. There's nothing to be done here. Thanks for trying, but you can let me pass, and let me be peace, and be at peace yourself. But us humans, we don't let go that easy. Yeah, he, one of the things he quite famously did is after he would pull in these nets, he would stick around to help the fishermen load their catch in, which was, pretty amazing. The nets
were so expensive, $8,000.
So expensive, and he would do this work. It was very unscientific work. I mean, he was literally in a Zodiac, throwing himself over with a mask and snorkel and a knife. There was no real secret to it beyond getting your head in the water, figuring out how the net was tangled around the whale and cutting it off. But he would actually take the extra time and discomfort. I can only imagine how uncomfortable it would be to have your head in water for hours at a time. He would take that time to make sure he was doing as little damage to the nets as possible. And the fishermen saw that, and then he would stick around and help them. He always saw the fishermen as allies in the conservation of these animals, and he knew that loss of this gear was devastating to them when it happened.
Yes, very wonderful man. Melissa Barbeau, Luminous Sea, can we hear your favorite reading and an outline further of what it's about? Well, we've already talked about scientific excellence. You can continue in that theme if you want.
They're not very excellent at being scientists, to be honest. In the course of this book, there's a team of researchers somewhere north of Northern Bay and Conception Bay, and they're studying bioluminescent seas. And in the process of that, a young research assistant hooks up a creature that might be a monster, or she might be a fairy tale creature, or she might just be some unknown species to science. And they're not expecting her, and they have a makeshift lab in a store, like the shed kind of store, not the shop kind of store. And they have nowhere to put her, so they put her in a chest freezer, and they make it into an aquarium. So I'm going to read to you towards the end of the book. Something terrible has happened to the creature at this point of the book, and something terrible has happened to Vivian, who's the researcher who has found her. The other person you need to know about is Tama, who's a friend of Vivian. She lives in the community. She owns the little cafe. And I think we mentioned Colleen, who's Vivian's immediate supervisor, and she's a piece of work. She is. Just inside the plank door of the store, Vivian is struggling with a navy windbreaker, the padlock that will lock her into the store from the inside looped over one finger. She'd been out for a smoke and had pulled the windbreaker on over her sweater to keep off the damp. It is made of some kind of crinkly material that makes a sound like cellophane. She wonders if it is nylon or polyester or some space-age synthetic that repels water and protects against UVA rays and UVB rays and is probably Wi-Fi capable. Maybe it is Kevlar. Whatever it is loud in her ears. The coat is noisy and it is too big, and she wonders who it belongs to. It certainly isn't hers. She's almost sure it is Colleen's and tries to picture the jacket on her. She thinks it must be the one Colleen wears while she waits on the wharf in the early morning hours for Vivian to pull up in the punt, the one she grabs when there's a drizzle of rain and they are popping over to the cafe for lunch. She can almost hear the jacket crinkle as Colleen shifts gears in the truck. She is almost certain. Still, the windbreaker is anonymous looking. It could be anyone's windbreaker, and she is anxious to get it off. It feels as if it is smothering her, closing off her windpipe. Maybe she's been smoking too much. Maybe she smoked herself out. Maybe tobacco smoke or nicotine or some other cigarette poison has seeped into the fabric of the jacket, and it is interacting with the space-age material, and she's being gassed. Probably it is the tar or the formaldehyde. She is abruptly, overwhelmingly hot and tries to rip the windbreaker off her body, but as she pulls at the zipper so violently it catches at the fabric and becomes stuck an inch or so from the collar. She thinks if she can only get the toggle down a little further, she will be able to pull the whole thing down over her hips and step out of it. She is nearly in tears, and she slips the padlock still looped over her finger into a pocket so she has full use of her hands. And she grasps the zip and pulls, and just as abruptly as it is seized up, it releases and slides down, as easy as butter. She peels the jacket from her arms and flings it at the nail where it usually hangs. It catches and hangs there askew, looking like last summer's scarecrow, a scarecrow coming down in the wind, the kind of scarecrow birds would laugh at on their way to a feed of seed. She is weak with relief to be coatless. She feels as though her legs can barely hold her, and she coopies down, one hand on the floor before she falls over. And this is how Tama finds her. Vivian's face bloated and red, splotchy from the cry she'd allowed herself earlier, and sweaty from the fight with the jacket. Vivian does not hear the door creak open, and when she senses the person standing over her, she looks up as if she is an animal caught. Vivian has to tilt her head upwards to see Tama fully from her position on the floor, apparated from nowhere, wearing hiking boots and carrying a brown paper bag. Later, she will wonder if her bout with the jacket is the reason she did not hear Tama creak the door open. She will wonder why she did not, at the very least, first hook the arm of the padlock through the loop. Vivian feels as if she has become rooted. But while her body remains immobile, her mind moves backward in time. She is sitting in Intro to Oceanic Invertebrates. The class is covering the unit on bivalves. She's watching a PowerPoint presentation, the word sessile, taking up the full screen. She remembers the high voice of the prof who would come to class always in a pair of green rubber boots, the way he had lisped over the word. Sessile. An organism attached directly to a fixed object via a stalk, i.e. barnacles, corals, bivalves. The sight of Tama has rendered Vivian sessile. She is a mollusk, a mussel clinging to a sea-battered rock, except the rock is the salt-stained wooden floor of the store, and the sea is the whisper of wind through the astoundingly open doorway. The fact of Tama with her sturdy boots and her parcel sends every ounce of Vivian's blood rushing, circumnavigating her body like a gyre. The tidal pull that might erode rock faces cannot move her. She is held in place despite the undertow. How terrifying to be a bivalve, unable to slam their shells shut against impending disaster, watching catastrophe descend upon them. Vivian is gaping, all her tender flesh exposed. When Tama speaks, she speaks as if there's nothing out of the ordinary, as if she finds nothing strange in discovering Vivian sweaty and red crouched on the floor of the store. First, sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. You came straight to work after I saw you, and I wasn't sure you had a chance to eat. And then responding to the look of anticipated panic on Vivian's face, it's not as bad as all that, girl. Tama lays down the bag, a line of concern drawn between her eyebrows. She takes a step towards Vivian, takes both Vivian's hands in hers, and pulls her to her feet. They stand. Tama does not let go of her. She is saying, "Take your time, girl, take your time," crooning at her like a feral kitten. Vivian considers her options. A rent has opened. An unexpected opportunity has presented itself. When she finally speaks, her words are as faint as a clam opening its shell. "Tama, can I show you something?" She walks backwards, still holding Tama's hands. They're like two children dancing. Vivian leads Tema across the floor, stops when her back touches the freezer. She drops her hand to touch Tama's waist and maneuvers her so that they face each other, hips touching the tank. She looks Tama in the eye, holding her gaze as if with string, as if with some indissoluble filament. In here. She's in here. Vivian looks into the freezer, snipping the thread between them. Tama follows her gaze. The creature appears lifeless. Her body has floated upwards. Tama reaches out to find Vivian's fingers, twining them gently through her own. If Tama and Vivian have been children dancing across the wooden floor, the fish is a child playing at drowning. The flutter of gills, the only whisper of motion. Tama inhales, this sound not quite a gasp. Her voice, when she finally speaks, is soft, as if she is frightened of waking her. Is she alive? She asks, and do you know what she is? Vivian tells her the story of blue moonbeams on the sea and swarms of jellyfish and the jagged hook, of the bumpy road to the store and the poor man's fish tank and the tests, the nibbling crabs, this floating stillness. She tells her almost everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And Vivian is sleeping on the floor in the makeshift lab because she's getting hugely concerned over this fish creature who is becoming the subject of this big research project. And her concern really is around research ethics, isn't it?
It's definitely part of her concern.
Yes.
Because part of the research team sees her as a commodity, as a way forward. And so they do things that they feel are necessary, for science. But whether those things are morally correct is questionable. And that's something that consumes her throughout the book, increasingly.
Yes, and we won't say what happens because that'll be a spoiler alert, right?
That would be very mean of us.
Yeah, it's a lovely ending. So, to the sea, because obviously you've heard this is what the one consistent theme is. And I'll read from Heather Smith's ebb and flow paragraph in her book. And you said, Jet says to his grandma, why can't things just stay the same? Because life is like the tides, in and out, back, forth, push, pull, high, low. Just have to go with the flow, Yeah, Grandma, he says. So can you talk a bit more about the analogy you're trying to bring forward in this book between the ebb and flow of the sea and the ebb and flow of, is it Jet's emotions, is it life, what is the analogy?
Well, the analogy for me was more to do with, it has to do with the ebb and flow and the change. And he's not in a very good place, and he doesn't realize that what he needs is time. And that it's part of life is to go through hard times. And actually, the inspiration for the book was finding a piece of sea glass. And it was a few summers ago I was here, and I had never, I've lived here my whole life, but I never really went sea glass hunting like Grandma Jo does. Mm-hmm. And I was looking for sea glass with my son, and I found a piece. And I was like, wow, this is really amazing. Where did this come from? And so I started Googling sea glass and found out about all the different kinds you can get and what the colors mean and, whether they're rare or not. And just the fact that someone can just throw an old beer bottle somewhere in the ocean and that spends so much time there getting bashed and battered, and then years later, someone else will find it on another shore, and it's just this beautiful gem. And that was the metaphor really for the book, was just the change, and that yes, Jet's going through a hard time, but he's going to come out better for it, and it's going to be the hard times that is what's going to make him who he is in the end.
But you also said several times in the book, fresh starts aren't what they're cracked up to be. That's not quite the quote, but...
Yeah, I think people think that if they're going through a rough time, that all they have to do is get away from it all and try something new and go for a fresh start. But actually, I think what a lot of the times what you need to do is you need to sit in the tragedy or in the turmoil that you're feeling, and you have to go through it.
And the sea was very helpful for this little Jet because it was the first place that he actually cried, and he used to yell at the sea. It helped him get a lot of his inner anger out.
Totally. Just sitting there and listening to the waves crashing. He throws all of his comics and he lets the waves eat them up.
Yeah.
And it's very therapeutic for him,
Yes.
being near the ocean. Yeah.
Well, Robert Chafe, I didn't realize till the play that John Leon came to Newfoundland as a gentleman who was studying birds, and he ended up studying something a little bit bigger. Tell me how living by the sea has influenced your writing and your perspective of what you are as a Newfoundland artist.
Oh my goodness. It is, and it's kind of like, asking to step outside yourself. It's such a part of who we are, right? I mean, a weird thing about me is that I have this everyone who knows me well knows that, like, who else doesn't have this dream? But my dream is to have a little house by the ocean. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up a hermit, like a little craggy sea cliff house somewhere. That's the dream, and that is a very weird dream if you talk to anyone that knew me before I was 20, because I was terrified of the ocean. Like, I had a full-blown phobia of it. I couldn't go up on Signal Hill. I couldn't go on Harbour Drive. Like, I had a full sweat panic attack of the ocean.
Oh my goodness.
Which is very, very strange.
Yeah.
And two things got me over that. I got a job one year at Signal Hill, so I had to get over it. There was a student trip that we went on to Italy and Greece, and the class got to vote whether we wanted to tack on a 4-day cruise on the end, and I was the only one who voted no. So I had to go on this cruise, and we encountered rough seas and had a full-blown panic attack. But anyway, I don't know what got me over that besides a kind of persistent, I guess just a knowing that it would be important to me, and you can't really avoid it in Newfoundland, right? I don't know how it shaped me. I guess I do know that I miss it whenever I'm anywhere else for very long. And, you can go walking by the lake in Toronto or by the river in Montreal, and it's just not the same. Yeah, there's something about the immensity of the flux that you get to see at the ocean. I have a very good friend with a beautiful home who lets me go work there, who's in the audience tonight. Thank you for letting me go work there. And the amount of time I spend in that home just looking at the little bay and the wind on the water and stuff, it's spiritual. I don't know, it's something. But yeah, that's the best answer I got.
That's a good one, thank you. Melissa Barbeau-Thomas, who's one of your characters, who lives in the community where they're doing the research, and he befriends this lovely Vivian. And they were looking at the ocean one day, and he asked her if she saw the sea as a separate world. Do you?
Yes, absolutely.
In what way?
Well, we can't go there, really. And I think just on the most basic level, as much, I think it's a funny thing, in Newfoundland we feel so much like we know the ocean, but we don't. We know so very, very little about it. It's this mysterious thing that's around us all the time. And I think we can't know it. And to Vivian, it is a really different place. And we know, science knows very little about the ocean. They say we know more about the surface of the moon than the surface of the ocean, and it's this great mysterious force, and I think she really does see it as something separate. And I think it is, and I think that's not a bad thing, that there's something out there that is mysterious and untouchable in a way to us, and that we are not going to figure out. I don't think there's anything wrong with being surrounded by that.
Oh gosh, no. The other theme that I found, and there are various degrees and different kinds, but you're all weaving around relationships. And for instance, Robert Chafe, your relationship that John Leon had with whales was absolutely extraordinary and magical. Can you share with us a bit more about what that relationship was, how he treated them almost as human?
Yeah, I mean, he was an interesting fellow, because when you hear people that worked with him talk about him, they paint a picture of a guy who's very, very practical, and who, very, very practical. He knew there were animals, etc. And when you talk to people that were friends with him and family, they paint a more spiritual relationship, which is very interesting. But he, quite famously, part of his thing that he used to do, as alluded in that monologue, he would do an eye catch with them. He would always make sure that he made eye contact with the whale, that he said would calm the animal down, that when they actually made eye contact, they would calm down and kind of see that there was someone there to help them. They're incredibly intelligent animals, so I don't doubt that's the truth. But I mean, mostly his relationship with the whales that I just find fascinating is the fearlessness of, you see, there's lots of great video online from CBC docs and stuff about him, and I mean, he's literally in a zodiac with a whale. Like, Wayne Ledwell a couple of years ago was in the news, who's still doing this work. Wayne Ledwell got knocked out by a whale tail, like in the middle of this procedure. A whale bucked, hit him in the head with its tail and knocked him out cold for 10 minutes. It's incredibly dangerous work. And, to do that with 500 animals over 25 years is just incredible. And I think that's the one thing that I came away with about John, was his fearlessness and just being able to look at something that is, big as the foyer out there and kind of go, I'm going to stick my head in and work with that. Is just mind-boggling to me. As a guy who was once afraid of the ocean, that's incredible to me.
Absolutely. And Melissa Barbeau, you also have a lovely relationship between Vivian and the fish creature, that's what I'm calling it. Again, almost a human-like one. Can you elaborate a bit on her affection? And was it, in a way, replacing a loneliness or something that she had because of her breakup with Eliza? Was it more than that? Or what do you think made it such a really emotional relationship with the creature fish that she defended?
Well, I like that you call her the creature fish, because it's sort of vague what this thing is. It is a creature fish, and we don't really know. And this creature fish, that's a good way of putting it, is really in the eye of the beholder. And how Vivian sees her is not necessarily how other characters in the book see this thing. And it's not necessarily how the reader is going to see this thing either. But I do think, I think Vivian is very vulnerable. She's very young. She's like 20. And she's very green, and she knows nothing of the world, and she's very lonely and alone. And I think she does see a lot of herself in this creature. And I think it is less a relationship, I think, necessarily between two separate things, in that she sees so much of herself there, reflected back to her.
It was lovely how you did that, actually, I felt.
Thank you.
Yeah. Your relationships are all quite complex, Heather Smith. The one between Jet, the young boy we're talking about who's had this accident, encouraged somewhat by this other fellow, Junior, and that was one really intense relationship, and then Junior with his dad, etc. But the one I'd like to zone in on right now is the wonderful one with his lovely, eccentric, gorgeous grandmother. And John Prine says a question ain't really a question if you know the answer to, but I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear you talk a bit more about how important it is for young boys, 11 to 12, young adolescents, who are in such internal turmoil with zero self-esteem and nowhere to go in life, not happy on the mainland, not happy, lonely still at home. But he had this wonderful grandmother that they played all these pun games with, and Monopoly and every Scrabble, and they had a wonderful relationship. So how essential is it for a young person at that age, in that turmoil, to have someone like a Grandma Jo in their life?
Well, Grandma Jo, she is eccentric. She's very unique. And she's also a very in the background kind of a character. They have lots of wordplay. They have this connection where they do puns and everything. There'll be a whole scene of them just coming up with puns. And I just think having this intergenerational relationship, it's just really important, because she's just a quiet presence, and she doesn't try and tell him what to do. She just kind of listens. And I think for a kid like Jet, who we don't see much of his mother, but back on the mainland, I mean, obviously she wants him to go away for the summer. He says, I think, she's the one that needs the break. And instead of having a parent nagging at you or telling you that what you did was wrong, she, over the course of the summer, just listens and waits for him to tell his story about what had happened. And a lot of that is just talking. And once he gets it off his chest, that's all he really needed to do. Yes. And have her quiet understanding was, a big part of their relationship.
Another theme, much less with yours, Robert Chafes, but there was a small bit of bullying, I felt, in your play, which I'll touch on first. And that was, which I didn't realize, was the relationship with the dean. And he really was quite aggressively against John, wasn't he? But in this case, it was unsuccessful bullying, because John won the day.
Yeah, well, I don't even know who that dean was, so if you're in the audience, I'm sorry, Dean of Science.
No, we don't know.
Circa, whatever.
It's just a play,
Just a play, it's all made up. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing about fictionalizing people that actually lived, because suddenly you kind of make all these little choices that then one day you're on a stage at the Rooms and someone goes, so tell me about that dean and what a bully he was, and I'm like, oh my god. But fair enough. No, I mean that scene and that relationship came out of. John was kind of a really easy person to write about, because every single person, I interviewed like 20 people, and every single person said the same thing about him, which was really incredible. They all said that, and they got to this themselves. I didn't lead them to this answer. They all, in some way, contextualized something to the effect of, if John needed to go over there and there was broken glass on the floor, he'd walk over it. If John needed to go over there and there was fire, they all said that he was so singularly driven that he didn't see obstacle. He just didn't see it. And so the dean in the show is one way of, and I had heard that he had butted heads quite a bit with the university administration because of that, because he came to work with whales because he was here to study seabirds. He grew up in South Dakota, moved to Newfoundland to study seabirds. He came to work with whales because he heard in 1976 or 77 there was a pod of pothead whales trapped in Notre Dame Bay somewhere. So one morning he literally threw his tent and some food in the back of the truck and said see ya to his family and drove to Notre Dame Bay, pitched a tent on the sea ice to be with these whales, and kind of, I guess, none of the family can really tell me why he did it beyond a kind of curiosity about what was happening to them. He knew he couldn't help. He watched the fishermen try to help, kind of watched their experience of dying, I guess, or, he was recording sounds of birds and stuff, so he might have recorded them as well. But he got a lot of press because of that, and then suddenly he was the whale guy, so people had a problem with whales. They're calling this crazy guy who used to camp on the ice. But he was that kind of singular in his vision of what had to happen. And when you're like that in the world, I think, I'm not. I bend quite easily. If someone, I think, last week, maybe not, but I bend quite a bit in my life usually. And but when you're like that, I think that you encounter people that push back, and that becomes quite heated. And I think that did for John a lot, including the people close to him in his life, people he worked with. Tons of stories I heard about John doing things that just pissed them off so much, but yet, of course, their deep love for the man burned through that, right?
Yes, yes. Now, your bullying, Melissa Barbeau, in yours is quite different, because it didn't bother John. It sounds like it was water off his back in a way. But with Colleen, with this colleague of Vivian, her supervisor that you referenced, you wrote well, because I absolutely detested that woman. I thought she was really unfeeling and aggressive and hurtful and selfish and all the negative things that a bully would characterize. So why did you have her so strongly opposed in her personality to Vivian? How did you come to that?
I think I want to feed a little off Robert with his answer, because I don't see her as quite so terrible. She's very singular-minded, and she is a woman in a scientific world where women are not recognized, and most people don't know the name of women scientists like Mary Treat or Mary Anning. It's people who have disappeared into history. And I think Colleen is, if this discovery pays off, Colleen is going to make it. Her name is going to be one that people know. And I think she just does the math and feels that, I think she's a feminist, and she thinks that the way forward is, if we have to sacrifice some people for the greater good of women moving forward, then I will do it. I think she's very driven, and that makes her appear mean on the page, because she will do what she needs to do.
Yeah, so I didn't totally misinterpret her
No,
meanness. Yeah,
she is terrible to Vivian, but I think it is not for the sake of being mean. I think she's moving forward, and she counsels Vivian at one point when this terrible thing happens to Vivian, and basically says to her, you just have to leave this behind and move forward. There is no time to be weak. And I think that is the way she views the world.
So bullying is not the right word for Colleen?
I don't think. No. I think she's driven and singular to the point of being incapable of caring about other people. And I don't know that even uncaring is true. But she's very singular and driven, and very sure that the only way to achieve her goals is by doing everything she has to.
Yeah, forward moving.
Forward moving.
Well, it was bullying, Heather Smith, in yours, for sure. And there was this gentleman, Junior, that I just mentioned, who made Jet do something he didn't want to do. But Jet's father was in jail for an accident that was involving murder. And what did Junior's dad do? Junior's dad was a real bully, that's right.
Yeah, Junior's dad
and so
was
Junior was bullying Jet who had this bad experience with his own family, but Junior himself, he had the bully, a horrible father to him. And I think he was sort of bullying Jet maybe to sort of overcome that. So there's more to bullying than meets the eye when you just see a bully, like two boys bullying each other. There are layers behind layers.
So I have 3 kids, and you know, your kids often come home from school and talk about the bully. And when they do, I want to know, who is this bully and what's their story? Why are they doing what they're doing? And that's kind of where the character of Junior came into play. He's a bully. He doesn't have any friends, but he has a really, really bad home life.
Yeah.
And you know, I think, and going back to the sea glass metaphor, it's like, these bullies that are in the school, they're so young. They have so much time to evolve and to change.
Yeah.
And they need to be given a chance and the benefit of the doubt. And for people to look further and think, what is this kid's story? Why are they doing what they're doing? Instead of demonizing them, I guess.
Just one more session of questions, then we're going to pass it to the audience. So please start thinking of questions. I got 25 cents for the first person who asks the question. It's Robert, I'll start with you, because when you did, again, this wonderful introduction, you talked about that inexplicable bubble of emotion that rises up in you. And you impressed me as a highly emotional individual from what I read here. Can you talk about that, if you don't mind, how emotional you are and how it doesn't, and how, no, you know what I'm talking about, and how it affects this kind of work?
Yeah, sure. It runs in the chafe men. We're all big sooks. My dad is like it. My dad is much better at it. I think I learned, I'm teaching playwriting right now at the university, and as I do, and most of my instruction time is talking to the students about emotional lying, how it's so much more powerful in a stage play to see someone not crying, like desperately not crying, as opposed to seeing someone break down and cry. And that we often say in the theater, if an actor cries for the audience, then the audience doesn't have to cry, and all this kind of thing. And I realize in this moment, I realize that my sense of drama might come from the fact of watching my dad so successfully not cry for my entire life. I think I've seen the man cry like 2 or 3 times, but he's a big softie. And all my brothers are like that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of what you're talking about, what I talk about in the introduction of this play, this play really is rooted in my writing process for Oil and Water, because I had been working on Oil and Water, which was a story that the Truxtun and Pollux disaster was a story that Grant Boland had told me years ago. We were standing and looking at his painting in Christina Parker Gallery of the wreck and the men being washed in the oil, and he told me the story, and I said, that's amazing, there has to be a movie. And I sat on that idea of turning it into a movie for 15 years, and I found out someone else was doing it, and I got depressed, and then someone said, well, why don't you make it a play? And so Oil and Water started, and as I was working on it with the dramaturg in Toronto, they used to work with Iris Turcotte, who passed away a couple of years ago. I thought I knew what the story was about, and so in the middle of a very, very frustrating workshop one week, where I thought I had the play, and she totally disagreed that I didn't, she blurted out in a moment of frustration. She said, every time you tell the story of Lanier Phillips, you end up crying. And it was true. I couldn't actually get through the story to tell somebody, what are you working on? And I'd tell the story and be a blubbering mess. And she said, that's not in the play yet. I have to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
And that was just so illuminating to me. And I walked away, and I realized that it was actually about my grandmother. Speaking of grandmothers, it was actually about my grandmother, and a woman who not only didn't leave the island of Newfoundland, rarely left the town of Petty Harbour. Probably, I don't know how far she went in school, grade 3 or 4 education. Completely horrendous, bad, like using the wrong terminology, like she would never get, like she didn't know how to properly refer to people, but her heart was so warm and generous and huge. And so I saw in Violet Pike in that story someone like my grandmother who was a product of innocence rather than ignorance. And so that opened that show. And in the middle of that, I said, wow, that was so illuminating to me. I'm never going to write a play again until I have a bubble of emotion like that I don't understand. Like, I want the process of playwriting for me now to be figuring out why a story is moving me. And so I counted John Lean's story and started bawling like a baby before I knew he had died or anything like that. And so it's kind of magical, right? And so I thought I was writing one thing, and it turned out that once I actually got to the bottom of it and started digging through it. It was actually about my own fear of death or something. I don't know. Yeah, but I'm totally driven by emotion. I feel I wear my emotions on my sleeve, although some disagree with that. Yeah, I think I proudly wear my emotions on my sleeve.
Yes, it's a wonderful thing. I mean, we're given emotions for a reason. Go for it.
I'm in the business of emotion, right? That's what theater is. You know, I always call myself an amateur psychologist, and that's what me and my colleagues do when we're working together on a piece. We're kind of charting that landscape of what people feel and what they allow other people seeing them feeling, and it's incredibly interesting and hugely educational every time, every project. So I try to feel big, yeah.
Melissa, you're here with two seasoned writers. This is your first time in this very challenging world of writing. Tell us about how that journey was for you. What were your challenges? How do you feel about what it took out of you, I would imagine?
This is the most surreal experience. So I did Winterset last summer as the emerging writer, and my book had been out 3 days when I got there. And I don't know how I ended up here. This is like the weirdest experience.
You wrote an amazing book.
It's very strange how this whole thing is happening. So I don't know how I ended up here. Who knows? The process of writing, it's a funny question. People ask me a lot because I have a big gaggle of children, which I always like to point out, and I work. And so it was hard, and I think it was hard in the way that I just plowed through it. Like I didn't think about big philosophical, emotional bubbles when I was writing about it. I was saying to Robert, like I was coming out the door to come here, and I was like throwing macaroni at the children, and I feel like this whole book was written like that. And so the process, I was like, please, I can't cook tonight. Somebody has to make toast, and I feel like that's what you're having for supper again tonight. And so I think the process for me was different than yours, where you emerged into an emotional bubble, and I just begged them to watch television, please.
I spend a lot of time alone. I get to go deep inside here an awful lot. It's not good.
Heather Smith, reading about your biography, you had a speech challenge when you were younger, and you've mentioned that this influenced some of your writing and some other issues. Would you like to share that with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So when I was really young, I had a speech problem, and I was really young, and it did obviously get fixed with speech therapy. But I do remember it clearly because I remember being made fun of for it. And I had a lisp, so I couldn't say S's and I couldn't say R's. So if I was going to say rabbit, I would say wabbit. So I remember like being made fun of for it, and always being on like wordplay going on in my head. So I was always thinking about what I had to say and how I could say it differently without using a word that began with S or a word that began with R.
Right.
So I like to tell, like when I go to do school visits, I tell the kids this because I'm like, that was a problem I had, but you know how useful that is when you're a writer and you're writing something, you're like, oh, I don't want to use that word again. You know, and it's just it's second nature for me now to think about what I'm going to say and think about, is there a better way to say it? Again, you know, talking about how Jet changed and how his problem will eventually, it'll make him a stronger person. You just got to look at the positive side of things, I guess. So, yeah.
And you still have some of your Newfoundland accent. So
I do.
I didn't get that out of you.
No, I have a Scottish husband, and we've been together for a long time, so I sometimes find that I might start talking like him. But it's like this merge of accents.
Okay, Heather McSmith.
Yeah, Heather.
Just quickly, from all three of you, next steps. Melissa?
I'm mucking around with something. I'm mucking around.
Oh, good. When might we see the result of your mucking?
Well,
I said that right. There's a lot of children.
let's say the children learn how to cook spaghetti.
Yeah.
I predict 1 year.
Yeah.
Depending on the
Oh,
spaghetti.
excellent. We look forward to that. Robert?
We're sending this on the road. This goes to Ottawa. This goes across the province next month, and then off to Ottawa, and then Halifax, and London, Ontario, and Victoria, BC, and a bunch of places. Wonderful. So that's happening, and I'm writing a couple of other projects that are on the way. Not secret, but, you know, just who wants to hear all that right now?
We do. Heather? Yeah.
So before I tell you what I'm working on, I just wanted to touch on Melissa's book. just to pique the audience's interest, because because your your chapter titles made my life. Because when a lot of my books don't have chapter titles, it's just like 1, 2, 3, or whatever. But you had chapter titles, and there's a chapter in Melissa's book called "In Behind the Whippersnipper." You all have to have a peek at "In Behind the Whippersnipper."
They told us we had to read something that was, because they're filming it for television, that was, clean.
I was
The
hoping for that one.
was not something that could be read on Rogers
But
television.
"In Behind the Whippersnipper," that's gold.
Leave it to your imagination.
Yeah. I have a young adult book coming out in next September. No, not the September coming, the September after. And it's set in Newfoundland, and it's a boy who basically wants to be a St. Pat's dancer, but he's not. I changed the name, and it's just about his exploits. So.
We look forward to it all. Now, please, we want lots of questions from the audience. And I can't see, so somebody can help with that. If anyone, do you need a mic there? Yeah. I can't see if there's a hand up, but there better be. It's 25 cents. 50? Oh, here we go. Front row. I have already paid you.
I just was interested, Melissa. I believe you're a member of Port Authority.
The Port Authority, I am.
Which is a brilliant name. And tell me a little bit. I mean, there's been a number of very vibrant writing groups here, but I've never heard of the Port Authority. But I think 2 of the 6 finalists were members of that writing group. So I really want to hear about it.
I love talking about the Port Authority because it's one of the gifts of my life. This brings us back to the wonderful and generous Lisa Moore. Lisa taught a fiction course at MUN maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and we just never stopped coming to class, the Port Authority. We were a member of the first class she taught, the first creative writing class she taught there, and 6 or 8 of us still meet every Thursday night, or every Tuesday night this semester. We skipped last night because we were here tonight instead, and we have... it's myself, Jamie Fitzpatrick, Morgan Murray, Gary Newhook. I don't want to forget anybody so badly. Sharon Bala. Who else? Carrie Ivardi, Susan Sinnott, who was also nominated for the Winterset. And who's the other one? No, she's in the other writing group. She's in Naked Parade, which is also, I think, a similar product of one of Lisa's classes, and are equally doing gangbusters and writing all kinds of things.
What do you do?
And we just bring...
It's in your if you want to make sure you get
Oh, who's
everybody.
the other one? I know I left somebody out.
Yeah.
Oh, and Matthew Lewis is down in the RCMP, so he's absconded somewhere else. We get together every second week. We bring all our new stuff, and they're the most vicious of my critics, and we are the most vicious of each other's critics. And now we have a group of people that I think love each other, and when you give them a piece of writing, they say, it's the worst thing I've ever written, burn it. And it has made us all, I think, better writers. Yeah. So that's the Port Authority. I love them. They're my favorite people.
Wonderful. Any more questions? No? Well, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and thank the viewing audience. I haven't said that for a long time. And thank all 3 of you. Just a wonderful evening to hear all of your perspectives, and we wish you the best of luck tomorrow. Thank you. Now, oh, Carol.
He wants you to have this, which is a really special treasure for him. It is the leather-bound.
Get my glasses.
It's the leather-bound copy of his award-winning Charles Taylor Prize for the first volume of his John A. MacDonald 2 books. And yes, so The Man Who Made Me. It's the only copy. It's a beautiful book, and he wants you to have it.
Oh, God bless you, and God bless Richard. Thank you.
Of the 2019 BMO Winterset Award is Heather Smith.
The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for free. Visit RogersAnyplaceTV.com.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Sup, party people? You ready to dance?
Ready to summer it up on Disney Channel?
What?
Then you're ready for a ride that's wild.
Whoa.
And roller coasters of the emotional kind.
You seem extremely huggable.
All summer.
So excited about summer.
New shows.
No spoilers, please.
New episodes.
Unexpected twist.
Every weekend.
Soups exciting.
We make it look easy, don't we?
No, we don't.
Summer it up on Disney Channel.
Sorry, it's catchy.
Hey, did you know?
More than 4,500 Canadians are waiting for an organ transplant right now.
Right now.
4,500.
People are dying.
And you could save a life.
90% of Canadians say they're willing to donate their organs.
But only a few are registered.
So what are you waiting for?
Get registered.
It's easy and it's free.
Leave a legacy.
Be a hero.
Save a life.
Find out how to register today. Go to kidney.ca.
Launching a canoe from a dock is a simple procedure. The paddle partner should climb aboard by placing one hand on the dock for balance and the other on the outside gunwale of the canoe. Then, you swing the stern of the canoe close to the dock, and the stern paddler climbs aboard using the same procedure. Once settled, push away from the dock and paddle away.
The lift wasn't working.